I've been thrown at the deep end to say I must actually try to assist to facilitate today's program. Before we waste further time, I would like to again greet everyone. I know that I'm actually told that the proceedings are also taking place virtually. So I'd like to also welcome colleagues who are actually connecting with us elsewhere. We're waiting for the COD who's on the way. I'm going to just start things so that we're not way behind on time. But as she's making her way up, I'm going to start with a small anecdote. Well, it's part of that anyway. Um, and this anecdote serves to foreground what today's event is about and to highlight the importance and the significance of what we are trying to achieve as a department. In 2024, in his book, Chabani Manganyi, Being Wild, Black, and Alienated in Apartheid South Africa, Professor Maboro, a Black existential philosopher, whom I consider Prof. Manganyi's intellectual biographer, because no other scholar has written about Prof. Manganyi more than him, challenged psychology as a discipline insofar as Professor Manganyi's intellectual legacy is concerned. He repeated the challenge more forcefully on the 16th of August in 2024 when he was invited to give a lecture at the University of Limpopo in the Department of Psychology. And he did this by asking two troubling questions about Professor Manganyi's relationship with his discipline, psychology. And he did this by asking these two questions. Why has Professor Manganyi's work not attracted the recognition and attention it deserves within mainstream psychology in the country? He has also a second question, and he says, is it because he's not psychological enough? And I can repeat the questions. He says, why has Professor Manganyi's work not attracted the recognition, and I'm quoting him, not attracted the recognition and attention it deserves within mainstream psychology in the country? And two, is it because he is not psychological enough? Perhaps these are questions that Prof. Manganyi himself first posed. For those of us who are familiar with his work, in his book, Treachery and Innocence, and if I'm correct, in a chapter on practical psychology, he does actually address that. Now, I hope that today's lecture and future ones will come to clarify and answer these troubling questions that have been daunting many of us. It is indeed possible for these questions to be answered because today we are in good hands in the form of our speakers, who, unlike me, are better suited and to provide us with a better understanding of Prof. Manganyi's relationship with the discipline and his place in the discipline. Today we are treated, and I'm salivating, colleagues, to three distinguished actually scholars in the form of Professor Mkhize, Professor Takata, and also Professor Stevens, who will actually be offering us, I guess, a better response to that challenge that was posed by Professor Maboro. I spoke to him over the weekend and he was excited about the event, and he warned me that he's in fact writing another book about Professor Manganyi. And the book is about Professor Manganyi and Fanon, and he's comparing their method. So with that said, I'm not going to take too much time, and that is just to foreground really what the significance of this event and what it really stands for. I'm going to request our Dean, Professor Nkosi, to come and officially open and welcome us to the event. Thank you. Let's give Prof. Hands of applause, please. Please take my apology. May I please request the speakers to perhaps come and sit in front. We have chairs, also the deanery and management to actually come in front. Sorry for that. Okay. Thank you.
Prof. Mkhize, Prof. Kagata, Prof. Stevens, if you may take the platform, please. Sanibonani. Hawu yebo wena nguzwa. Hawu sanibonani. Goeiemôre. Good morning. Ndimacheron. Dumelang. Ay, this audience angnizwa. Ay, angnizwa. Distinguished guests, esteemed colleagues, students, friends, family, good morning and welcome to this August occasion. It is our great honor as the College of Human Sciences to welcome you to the inaugural of Prof. Chabani Manganyi public lecture, which is hosted by the Department of Psychology, and the Department of Psychology forms part of the College of Human Sciences under the School of Social Sciences. Today marks the beginning of a meaningful annual tradition, one that celebrates the life, work, and legacy of an extraordinary South African who is Professor Chabani Manganyi. I'm so grateful that the family is here. They are giving us an opportunity to celebrate the life of the first Black clinical psychologist in South Africa, a respected public intellectual, an author, an administrator, and the thought leader. Prof. Manganyi's impact continues to reverberate across multiple disciplines and generations in the continent. We are especially proud to recognize that Prof. Manganyi is an alumni of the College of Human Sciences. The wife can attest, yes? Yes. This is a powerful reminder of the role our institution has played, and it continues to play in shaping the minds and nurturing leaders who are committed to justice, truth, and transformation. Those are the three variables that describes Prof. Manganyi: justice, truth, and transformation. As we honor his legacy today, we are also deeply mindful of those who walk alongside him. I wish to take a moment to acknowledge and warmly welcome his family, friends, colleagues, and mentees who have joined us. Thank you, family, for sharing him with the world. Your presence today reminds us that behind every great mind is a community of love, support, and shared purpose. As a College of Human Science, we are committed to knowledge production that uplifts, challenges, and transforms. This lecture is not simply a tribute. It is a continuation of the intellectual, ethical, and psychological work to which Professor Manganyi dedicated his life till the end. Ladies and gentlemen, we are privileged this morning to be joined by Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize as our keynote speaker, and we extend our gratitude to the esteemed respondents who will help us reflect on the enduring relevance of Prof. Manganyi's contributions. Sincere thanks also goes to the Department of Psychology for identifying Prof. Manganyi as the person to be annually inaugurated. For those who are not aware, Professor Mkhize is a dynamite that comes in bigger packages. Last month, the SAHUDA, which is the South African Deans Association in South Africa, awarded him the first honorary recognition award for his work that he did. Let's give him a round of applause. Prof. Mkhize, your work is noticed, and we are proud that you agreed to be the first keynote speaker, and I'm sure the Manganyi family appreciates your presence. Professor Mkhize, the recognition was given, as we all know that many people are always talking about STEM, 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 as if humanities don't exist. So Professor Mkhize, with the group of the deans, they started the Sahoda, which says the humanities, the Faculty of Humanities exist because we are here for social justice, for truth, and for transformation, as Professor Manganyi lived with those variables. May this inaugural lecture inspire critical reflection, dialogue, and renewed dedication to the ideals that Professor Manganyi so powerfully embodied. I would love to thank the College of Human Science and Management team that is here, the Department of Psychology, family, friends, and all those that supported us in person and also online. You are all welcomed.
Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Can we please give another round of applause for Prof? We're going to move right along and go straight to the business of the day and invite our keynote speaker. I'm going to just summarize. They've already explained the giant that is amongst us and within our midst. We have Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize, who's, amongst many things, a psychologist who's based at UKZN, and currently he's actually a deputy vice chancellor of the university. I would like us to please let us give him a warm welcome to the podium. We are yours, Prof.
Thank you very much, Program Director. I must pause because the weight on my shoulders, I'm feeling it, because we are in the presence of a great intellectual giant, even though he's not with us here, Professor Manganyi. And we also want to begin by welcoming in a very special way the family and all friends who are here. And I also want to recognize our Dean, Professor Nkosi, my fellow speakers today, as well as all the academics who are with us. It is a privilege and great honor to have been invited to deliver this keynote address to this august audience. The title that I've chosen is Against Epistemic Injustice: The Relevance of Professor Chabani Manganyi's Scholarship to Contemporary Psychological Thought and Identity. I welcome you all, and I also want to welcome all the future leaders of our country, the continent, and the globe who are with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, in the late 1960s, Professor Manganyi qualified as a first locally trained Black clinical psychologist in South Africa. By virtue of this extraordinary achievement in a country that was profoundly divided along racial lines, in which being Black amounted to being less than human, he became the first Black person to enter a profession that has been characterized as Eurocentric and ill-equipped to address the psychological realities of Black people. It is with reference to this world in which, in the Heideggerian sense, And I'm doing this deliberately because we can see that he's drawing enormously from existential phenomenological thought, particularly the work of Heidegger, the notion of Dasein. He was thrust socially, existentially, and scholarly into a world in which becoming a Black psychologist was, in a way, being thrown among the wolves, as it were, given the prevailing climate of the time. In his scholarly works, beginning with the widely acclaimed book, Being Black in the World, and running throughout his scholarly and creative contributions, Manganyi is acutely aware of the alienated or problematic or schizophrenic existence of the Black body or experience. This presentation focuses mainly on his psychological contributions with special reference to alienation, violence, the biographical method, and healing. Using Frickler and Dodson's notion of epistemic injustice and hermeneutic exclusion, I will argue that institutions of higher learning have in fact not done enough to transform the profession. Incorporating Manganyi's work into the core of psychology will go a long way in recognizing the Black experience and the diversity of human thought. That Chabani Manganyi is one of the most prominent and theoretically sophisticated psychologists to have been produced in South Africa with a strong sense of social justice and application of psychology to address matters of public interest would be hard to argue against. Manganyi's treatment of the body, particularly the body in psychology, and his analytic skills in uncovering the workings of the unconscious, both in clinical settings and in his work with clients and in the public spheres, in analyzing the characters in his creative writings, are perhaps unrivaled. Yet there seems to be a systematic erasure of his work, which in my view amounts to epistemic injustice and hermeneutic exclusion of his voice. This despite the fact that he produced voluminous theoretical and practical work under the immense pressure of the South African apartheid state, which on the other hand had deployed psychology to further its own racially segregated policies in education, housing, health, etc. It will not be lost to this audience, of course, that Hendrik Verwoerd, considered the architect and father of psychology, considered the architect and father of apartheid, was in fact a psychologist. Manganyi's own journey counters, in my view, the journey of Verwoerd, and he should be seen in that frame. Manganyi's journey to become a psychologist, which he articulates in his autobiography on becoming a psychologist in apartheid South Africa, as well as in a similarly titled article in the Journal of Psychology in 2013, aptly captures not only the challenges he encountered in his professional training and subsequent practice in clinical settings, but also his resolve and determination to rise above these challenges. In so doing, he affirmed being Black in the world. It is a story, a narrative of an extraordinary resilience. It is under these circumstances then that Manganyi emerged as a unique figure who saw the task of psychology not only as diagnosing individual disorders, working from the office, as he says in one of his books, but as uncovering how systemic oppression shapes consciousness, subjectivity, and identity. The book, Being Black in the World, addresses this issue at length, among others. He was one of the first to apply psychological principles in the courtroom to defend the victims of apartheid, further demonstrating the practical relevance of a discipline that is at times questioned in Black communities due to its Eurocentric epistemological foundations. It is thus paradoxical that his work is not present in the psychology curriculum, and were it not for the concerted efforts of a few scholars working in the critical paradigm, such as our friends, Hayes, Hook, Stevens, Kigua, Sekalo, amongst others, these scholars working in decolonial psychology and psychoanalytic circles, perhaps his work may have been forgotten by now. In this presentation, I sketch a brief sketch of Manganyi's intellectual life in order to show how he drew upon psychological tools, including biography and autobiography, to construct an emancipatory psychology that was aimed at addressing the lived experiences of the marginalized. I also touch another neglected aspect of Manganyi's work, namely his contributions towards emancipatory methodologies through the use of the biographical and autobiographical method. In this, he shows, perhaps in a manner that is similar to the Russian literary traditions, reminiscence of the work of Dostoevsky and Voloshinov and Bakhtin, how literature can be used as a vehicle to understand the human mind. In my view, this is one of the most unique contributions that he made to psychology, that literature is a laboratory that can be used to understand the dynamics of the unconscious, especially also the dynamics of the collective or the group unconscious. Let me reflect a little bit on his early life, leading to him becoming a psychologist. In his autobiography, Manganyi goes at length to tell about his background and early life, how he grew up, and how he was raised, how he was born of a generation of grandparents who had come to work in South Africa from Mozambique. That alone is telling. From an early age, he had been nurtured to love knowledge and to be curious about life in general. It is in this chapter that he reflects on being caned by one of the teachers after missing school for a week, and that I found quite interesting. In the sense that caning is now no longer allowed at school, but he seems to have taken this in a very positive light. He continues to reflect that had he not been caned, maybe he would not have become the intellectual giant that he became. Okay, so Manganyi went on then studying in the missionary schools, obtaining his BA degree from the University of Turflop, newly proclaimed Black University, and then going on to pursue his honors and masters in UNISA. But most importantly, obtaining his PhD at the tender age of 30, which is an extraordinary achievement, particularly in the humanities. We in the Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences and SAHUDA have been trying to lower the age of graduation amongst the humanities students, which is 38 to 40 years for the PhD. And yet we have someone who was working in that context already at the age of 30, he is getting a PhD. Unfortunately, due to the policies of the time, Manganyi finds himself not being able to practice his profession or to be trained in the same way that other aspiring professionals or psychologists of his time were trained. He couldn't go to Tara to get clinical psychological training, and again, that was the reflection of the policies of the time, that he had to train at the Baragwanath Hospital, which is a general hospital. So let us give a little bit of the context of his work, particularly with a reference to resistance under apartheid. To fully grasp Manganyi's intellectual and professional formation, one must understand the historical context in which he entered the field of psychology. In South Africa at the time, psychology was not just a profession, it was also a political tool. It was complicit in maintaining the racial hierarchies of the time and was dominated primarily by clinicians who were serving the interests of the state and was built around the Eurocentric assumptions of mind, pathology, and behavior. Manganyi reflects on this in one of his articles published in PINS, titled Making Strange, Race Science and Ethnopsychiatric Discourse. And I really want to pause here and really reflect and ask us to acknowledge the contributions that has been made by PINS, Psychology in Society, under the leadership of Graham Hayes, to advance the scholarship of Manganyi. Of course, we cannot understand that that connection through what in the 80s was called the OSA, Organization for the Appropriate Social Services in South Africa, which positioned themselves against the dominant racial psychological discourse of the time. In this particular article, which I quote at length, Manganyi reflects as follows, and here he's referring to the representation of blackness, the representation of blackness in racial psychological science. And I'm going to quote this at length a little bit. He says, the fixity of the representation of the other or blackness, which race science places before our own eyes, pronounces the genetic inferiority of blacks, particularly with regard to intelligence. The discourse says it cannot be helped, and no one should fret about it. Let it be so. What makes matters worse is that this phenomenon of making strange. Only this time, the discourse is not pressured beyond itself by a torrent of epithets. The in society. He continues, and I also want to reflect on this. He says, while the work of Einstein and Jensen represents part extensively about Manganyi, but also at times softly and diplomatically criticizing him for not putting emphasis or enough emphasis on Africana phenomenology in his autobiography. More writes as follows in 2021. Chabani Manganyi, perhaps out of modesty or out of disdain, leads the articulation of his discursive contributions to a philosophical tradition known as Africana existential phenomenology or Africana existential psychoanalysis, in which he stands as one of the main pillars and pioneers. I have no problem with Manganyi, the psychologist, and his narrative in and by itself. What concerns me is what he does not say about that aspect of his work, which, in my view, had so much impact on the succeeding generations of scholars, students, as well as political activists, and generated so much scholarly work in the form of articles, theses, and dissertations written about it. I think these are some of the points that continue to be debated today, and I hope that we will be able to interrogate it maybe in more detail. It is important to note also that in the book, Being Black in the World, Manganyi writes at length about the philosophy of dialogue and existence, which in fact may confirm what Mabogo More says above, that maybe this was one of his most extraordinary contributions, drawing obviously from the philosophy of Heidegger, as well as a phenomenological philosophy. And in this notion of working within the tradition of Africana philosophical anthropology, this is the early Manganyi. He goes on to cite the works of Senghor and Tempels. Most of you will be aware that the work of Senghor, even though it made an important contributions to African scholarship and emancipation, it has been criticized in a way for sort of a reification of the Black experience. And so has the work of Tempels, who was one of the missionaries of the time. So are we seeing a shift here in Manganyi's work at the time that he's writing his autobiography? But I do need to hasten to add, however, that in all of this, even in his reference to Senghor and Tempels, for Manganyi, it is the lived experience of his way of being Black that is paramount. In fact, that thread runs throughout his work, from being Black in the world right up to the late autobiography. For Manganyi, it is the sociological meaning of inhabiting a Black body or white body, as he articulates it in another essay in this book. Considerations of the Black experience constitute a common thread in Manganyi's work in Being Black in the World, Mashango's Reverie, and other essays looking through the keyhole, political violence and the struggle in South Africa, as well as his biographies. For now, though, it is sufficient to mention that Manganyi's clinical works and writings before and after his departure to South Africa and back from the US were directed at the understanding of this Black experience and the phenomenological concerns that were relevant then at that particular time are still relevant now. What is the condition of the Negro, to use Sisi Dangaremba's words? What is the condition of the Negro in the spaces that we continue to find ourselves? What is the condition of the Negro or of the Black, as in all those who are falling under categories, various forms of categories of oppression. What is their condition in the spaces that they inhabit, and what is their sociological response to being positioned the way they are? I think these are questions that we should continue to ask, even as we inhabit these spaces in higher education, in our communities, in our families, etc. So the experience of being subjected to extreme forms of violence is as important as it was now, and the issue of turning that violence against the self that Manganyi spent so much time reflecting on continues to be relevant. We also need to consider this as we think about the training of psychologists in the country. You will recall, of course, that Manganyi had, in the first instance, obtained his master's by a dissertation or thesis, and thereafter continued to do an internship in order to qualify as a clinical psychologist. That route is still possible even now. As a result, he had not been exposed to practicing with white patients at Tara. So I want to ask us, as people who are running psychology departments now, psychology departments have been run by Black people for the past 20 years. My colleagues here will concur with me. Where do we send our Black interns to practice? Do we send them to practice with Black patients only? I remember this very vividly when I was still heavily involved in clinical practice at the Pietermaritzburg campus of the University of KwaZulu-Natal, that by and large, if you were a Black student, you were allocated Black patients. Similarly, if you were a white student, you were allocated a white patient. So we need to begin interrogating those kinds of dynamics that are happening in our spaces, because those are the very same experiences that Manganyi was reflecting on. And they are as real as they were during his time. Again, the notion of the body and the significations and meaning of the body it remains to be important. Recalling my own experience again as a young psychologist supervising interns. I think Dr. Njanga says here, I think he was with us at the University of Natal at the time. We are taking a group of students to the practicum, Edendale Hospital or to some other practicum. We are more or less the same age at the time. Nobody can tell who was the lecturer. Okay, the first thing that happens, you sit down there, okay, you begin doing your interview, isiZulu, etc. Your white colleague is sitting there watching. When you have done all the work, then the mother of the child that you are assessing will then stop and say, but my child, but mtanami, ngicela ukubona udokotela. Can I please see the doctor? You can see now how the Black experience is represented in that space, similar to the various issues that were raised by Manganyi. The issues of translation that he talks about in his book, they are still there. Some of our clinicians have referred, for example, to the use of interpreters during clinical services as veterinary science, in the sense that those who are presenting in that space, their integrity is being ethically violated in a way that should, in fact, not be the case. Why are we not then foregrounding training in a way that will also recognize the humanity of the other? This is the challenge that we are throwing at all of us as people who are involved in the clinical training of students, so that we do not repeat the challenges of Manganyi's time. I don't know how I'm doing for time. This paper is still very long. Okay. I'm going to try and comment on some of the salient aspects. Most importantly now, I want to comment on the training that Manganyi received abroad. Now, I want you, many of us, to make this connection. If you look at the history of South African ideas, and especially as they are coming from black circles, those who went to study abroad, in fact, tend to be the ones who came back with a much emancipated sense of being. And as a result, they were able to make profound contributions and changes in their society. I think it will be very difficult to argue against this. I'm not saying that local training is not good, but if you look generally, the experience of being emancipated, of being in a different space, of inhabiting a different space where you are being looked at in a different manner contributes to your emancipation as a scholar. And I think this is precisely what happened when Ubaba Chabani Manganyi went to study abroad. He got that sense of emancipation. In fact, he talks about it it talks about the sense of anguish that he had taken abroad and how he had to undertake his own psychoanalysis in order to address the boiling concerns, anger that were still within him as a human being. So coming to the world of the free in the United States, he was then able to begin this kind of self-analysis. So the question is, therefore, what is happening in amongst the young people living in Inanda, for example, in Durban? I'm citing this because I grew up in that space, which is regarded as one of the most violent spaces in the world. What happens to that sense of anger? And what is the outlet for that particular anger? The issue of the unconscious that Manganyi addresses with reference to himself is important in terms of us understanding violence that is taking place in our society. The issue of the body is one of the most central aspects of Manganyi's work. And again, it tends to run throughout. You will recall that he did his PhD on that subject, okay? When he did, in fact, his PhD was experimental, which is quite unusual for somebody who's so deeply rooted in phenomenology or phenomenological thought, where he reflects on how he spent an inordinate amount of time discussing with his supervisor the statistical methods that were going to be used. Okay, comparisons, most likely two groups, independent t-test or man-Whitney U-test, whatever the case was be. In this particular experiment, he discovers that the body image of healthy black subjects, salesmen, if I recall correctly, is no different from that of a clinical group who was supposed to be exposing a much unhealthy body image. Now, what is that telling us about the body image of us as black people? What do we think of us in terms of the body? Obviously, we will continue to do a whole lot of things to be other than who we are. We read, for example, that in Nigeria and other western parts of the continent, and also increasingly in South Africa, the phenomenon of body whitening is one of the most problematic that we are dealing with. which is a very, very active act of self-denial. A very, very active act of self-denial, trying to be that which you can never be. And in so doing, you are destroying your own body. You are destroying your melanin, your protective melanin. So those are the issues then that we need to continue to interrogate in our own societies, the meaning of the body, how the body presents in all spaces, in educational spaces, in spaces where competence is going to be at stake, etc. This is very important. I remember reflecting on my own training as a psychologist and later in the faculty boards. Those days, I have to refer to faculty boards because Manganyi is a scholar, but he was also an administrator. So most likely he would have experienced this in the various administrative spaces that he occupied. My own faculty board, or my very first faculty board, you are sitting there, you are surrounded by more or less whiteness. The moment you speak, everybody will turn and look in your direction. Tell me that you haven't experienced this. I challenge you to say you haven't experienced it. Why? Because you have made an utterance in a space where your utterance is unwelcome. This is the fundamental issue here, the issue of finding voice, the issue of the utterance, the issue of positioning yourself dialogically in that particular space. I'm about to end now because I see we don't have enough time, but the issue here, even in the biographies and autobiographies that Manganyi wrote, the issue of utterance and voice, and speaking, articulating your point of view, multivocality in that space, many characters, and even Mpahlele also articulating this in his own point of view is center stage. Why? Because he wants to demonstrate the issue and the importance of agency. So where is the agency then amongst all the marginalized populations of the world? Where is agency in this time and age in the context of blackness? I think, to be fair, let me now recommendations. I see I've... So to try and get back to this, because technology has done something here. So in conclusion then, ladies and gentlemen, Manganyi's work remains very important, not only with reference to clinical and applied psychological work. His work is important as we deal with the many challenges that we are being confronted with in South African society. They may be about understanding gender relations, violence turned against the self, violence turned against the other. They may be about the use of psychology to address common public issues. Right now we are experiencing the greatest mental health challenges in the country, and still there is an underrepresentation of Black psychologists in professional training, and people who are characterized by Blackness, on average, will never see a psychologist in their time. That's a fact. They will never see one. Why? We have been saying this for a long time, despite the great contributions post-1994 by the Psychological Society of South Africa and other societies, or ESA and other societies. Despite those contributions to try and change professional training, not much has changed in terms of the syllabus. But also we are now seeing an emergence of another danger that we should try and contain. The tendency for our trained, clinically trained young students to become part and parcel of this capitalist dialogue or capitalist, or being captured in the capitalist mode of being. We need to return to the psychology and the training of psychologists who care. So in conclusion, then, ladies and gentlemen, as I indicated, I titled this lecture, The Epistemic Injustice and Hermeneutic Exclusion. I want, similar to what Hayes has done, to call for the reinsertion of Manganyi's work into mainstream psychological science. Fricker, Dodson, Medina, and others have written at length about epistemic injustice and hermeneutic exclusion. Hermeneutic exclusion is when you are excluded from the community of knowers as somebody who cannot make a valid, meaningful contribution to discourse. Similarly, in the decolonial term, scholars such as Dos Santos, McDonaldo Torres, etc., have called for cognitive justice. The work of Manganyi, we are calling for cognitive justice, that the work of Manganyi needs to be included. A question arises, therefore, as to why is this work not part of the mainstream syllabus in South Africa? Why? You heard from our program director here, why is the work too difficult? Notice, yes, some of the psychoanalytic work is a bit difficult, but there's a lot of difficult work in psychology. It's very difficult to read Sigmund Freud. So we cannot explain the absence on the basis of the work being difficult. So Manganyi's work is also cutting edge. It's not a low-grade work. So the lack of recognition, therefore, in these debates, in my view, is historical. It constitutes hermeneutic exclusion, and Manganyi's work should be seen in the same vein that we see the works of Biko, Mignolo, and others. And in this, there are certain practical interventions that can be done. We have now started today with this public lecture series. This is a very good start. Secondly, the work needs to be included in the syllabus. It needs to be prescribed. Heads of departments need to do this. Thirdly, we need to have scholarships in the name of Manganyi. Why is that not possible? Very first black psychologists, that alone deserves that the work must be included so that the students know about the history of the development of psychology in the country. So we need to have scholarships in his name. We need to have postdoctoral fellowships. By next year, there needs to be a postdoctoral fellowship dedicated to the work of Manganyi. And I personally, I want to commit that at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, I'm standing here. I want to commit that at the University of KwaZulu-Natal, we are fully committed to advancing this scholarship. In retrospect, we realize that we have delayed for too long, and we cannot delay any further. And with these words, thank you very much. Thank you so much.
Colleagues, I think our keynote speaker deserves an even better round of applause. Thank you, Prof. I think you deserve that because you also helped us with time. So we're doing way, way good on time. Yes. So you could have gone further, but I appreciate that. I'm going to perhaps just make a few announcements with regards to refreshments. So I noticed that some of us may not necessarily have water. We have water. We've actually just put more of the refreshments on the other side. We also have coffee and tea. So please, during the proceedings, if you feel that you're thirsty, you may walk there and actually help yourself. Thank you. So I'm going to move right along to introduce our respondents. We have two fitting, I think, respondents. We welcome and appreciate the challenge that you've given them, Prof, and I think you have been generous, in fact, in your analysis of Prof. Manganyi, and you've been balanced in your analysis of Prof. Manganyi, and I hope that they'll be able to take it from there. We have two respondents. We have one that is Prof. Garth Stevens. Prof. Garth Stevens comes from the University of Witwatersrand. He is actually a psychologist, first and foremost. I must actually repeat this. Because it's important that we do that. But he's currently actually the Deputy Vice Chancellor of WITS. I'm introducing both because then I'm not going to come back to the podium and they'll just then follow each other. And our second respondent is actually our colleague from the university and the department, that is Professor Kakata, who is also a psychologist and will also then be at least help holding the fort and not having outsiders, run away with us today. So you'll be defending us, so to speak. Colleagues, please help me to welcome Professor Stevens to the podium. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Makubela. Thank you to the Department of Psychology, the College of Human Sciences. I want to acknowledge the Dean, the Chair of the department. I see some old faces here that I haven't seen for a little while. And it's really great to be here and to be with you all today. Also, thank you to our keynote speaker, to our respondent as well. Appreciate the opportunity to engage with you at this important event, which of course is the inaugural Professor Chabani Manganyi public lecture. I also want to acknowledge the family of Professor Manganyi here today, and to thank them for allowing us to have this lecture in his name. Chabani Manganyi was an 84-year-old gift to psychology and to South Africa, and I don't think that we all necessarily recognize that in a deep way. And I'm hoping that I can cover one or two points that just illustrates that today, rather than go over the same terrain that Nhlanhla has gone over, but perhaps to not necessarily respond, but to be in conversation with your paper. I think he needs no introduction. Manganyi needs no introduction, but for the sake of an entire audience, he was the vice principal at the University of Pretoria. He was the vice principal at the then University of Limpopo. He received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Research Foundation. He was a research fellow at the Center for Advancement of Scholarship. He, of course, is an alumnus of this institution, of UNISA. He did a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale. He was also instrumental in establishing the Department of Psychology at the then University of Transkei. He served as a research fellow at the African Studies Institute at WITS in the 80s and the 90s. And of course, he was the first post-apartheid Director General of Education under then President Nelson Mandela. In addition to that, he was the CEO of JET. He was also the chairperson of the CHE, the Council of Higher Education, and of course an honorary fellow of the Psychological Society of South Africa. And I'm sure you'll agree that that is nothing short of a stellar career. A psychologist, a scholar, a public intellectual, an institutional builder, and of course a university administrator. He was all of those things wrapped up into one. And my exposure to Manganyi, actually in ways that are very similar to others, I actually didn't know about Chabani Manganyi's work until I was an honors student. I was at the University of Cape Town for my undergraduate degree. I then went off to the University of the Western Cape. And this was the first time I'd encountered Fanon. It was in my honors year. And as a consequence, just immediately after Fanon, we turned to Manganyi's work as well. And of course, in the department at the time, there was a contestation about whether this should be taught or not. There were some people who thought it should not be taught. And I recall the debate among staff at the time saying that actually Fanon and Manganyi were not really psychological texts, that they shouldn't really be included in the curriculum at that point. This was a debate in the 1990s already. And it seems to me that that debate has not resolved itself in some way or another. But let me just say that most contemporary readers of Manganyi's work probably came to his work through his 2016 book, which is on the table here, I think, Apartheid and the Making of a Black Psychologist. But of course, his work spans much more than this, more than 4 decades of work. His work, of course, is in the home discipline of psychology, but also in literary studies, philosophy, education, history, politics, art, aesthetics. And of course, Nhlanhla has already mentioned some of the work, Mashangu's Reverie and Other Essays, looking through the keyhole, political violence and the struggle in South Africa, Treachery and Innocence, Psychology and Racial Difference in South Africa, On Becoming a Democracy, Transition and Transformation, and of course, not to mention his biographies of Gerard Sokoto, Eskem Pahlele, and Dumile Feni. You can see that the body of work was just phenomenal. Right? He's thinking about the Black experience in context of systemized oppression, his ideas about responses to these forms of domination, his writings on violence and its place in the world that is racialized, the recovery of Black thought and practice, and of course, his reappropriation of psychological knowledge in the service of humanity are all central threads in his work. I have to say that personally, I had the privilege of working alongside Chabani. He and I both served on the board of the Wits University Press together. And I also had the privilege of working with Graham Hayes and Roshan Kader as an editorial collective at Wits University Press when we were republishing Chabani's Being Black in the World, that was first published, of course, in the turbulent period of 1973. I also had the privilege of writing the foreword, and Graham Hayes did the annotations for this particular version of the book. And of course, Njabulun Ndebele's essay comes at the back of this book. So it really is a privilege for me to be here today and to reflect on, I think, just 3 points that I want to make in the allotted time that I have. In some ways, Chabani Manganyi's work was groundbreaking. It was ahead of its time, which, you know, it wasn't only prescient about what was to come, but in some ways, it fell on deaf ears at the time, I think, in many, many ways. I don't think that South African psychology was, quite frankly, ready to receive the work at that particular point in time. Partly because of the composition of professional psychology, partly because of the curricula and so on. But for many of us as scholars in the arts, humanities, and social sciences who've been re-engaging Manganyi's work, we believed him to have been an undervalued, critical Black intellectual and scholar in this country. Of course, we were committed to having him appropriately located and recognized within the fields of literature, psychology, political science, and so on. Now, since 2015, 2016, South Africa's political landscape has seen a groundswell of calls for decolonizing universities, curricula, social institutions, the arts, and a recalibration of what constitutes the canon in most disciplines. The synergies between Manganyi's Being Black in the World and these decolonizing calls for an integration of the legacies of coloniality an interrogation of the legacies of coloniality on forms of knowledge, subjectivity, and power are very clear to many of us, even though Manganyi was less known as a public intellectual in comparison to the likes of figures such as Biko. This particular iteration of the decolonial turn in South Africa prompted many of us to kind of relook at the work of Césaire, of Fanon, of Biko, and of course, to a different degree, Manganyi. The point I'm trying to recover from his body of work relates to knowledge and its reproductive and contestatory role in subject formation. Knowledge helps us to craft understandings of ourselves and others in the world, and in so doing is central to the process of personhood, of subjecthood. It shifts in and out of hegemonic and subordinated positions, making it a key feature of what kind of subject can be possible at any given point in time. I'm, of course, alluding to matters of epistemic contestation, epistemic disobedience, rupture and reconstruction, or cognitive justice. And this has already been mentioned by our keynote speaker. In some ways, Manganyi's journey through psychology as a discipline is perhaps a mirror of the challenges faced by many disciplines that are internally contested by subordinated epistemes, but also more generally across various moments in time. His engagement with his own conservative kind of disciplinary home at the time, the psychological sciences of the 20th century, his own intellectual tussles with hegemonic epistemes in trying to deliberately uncover and recover black subjectivity, and the experiences of what he referred to as the vandalized minds of black South Africans under apartheid. His analysis of state-sanctioned violence and counter-violence, his use of mainstream psychological knowledge in the defense and support of victims of apartheid, these were all examples of his epistemic contestation and reconstruction. The point to make here is that disciplines are not static. They are fluid and knowledge is mobile, allowing us to think about the limits of its possibilities and the insertion of new kinds of knowledges in the recovery of intellectual potency or agency as subjects. As I've indicated, in the past few years, there have been many debates about decolonization and curricula. Manganyi's intellectual threads that have spanned these more than 4 decades are an illustration of the very ideas of epistemic disobedience, contestation, rupture, and reconstruction. I think it's probably apt for us to just remember that in his memoir, he talks about the complexity of being a subject, a black subject, and he talks about his own experiences. You'll recall that he talks about his complex relationship to mission schooling. It's both good and it's bad. He talks about psychology as a discipline that he on the one hand rejects, but at the same time reappropriates and reapplies. He talks about a racialized professional community that he has a very clear ambivalent relationship to. And so he signals a profound way that our subjectivities are fluid rather than static. This relationship between knowledge, epistemic disobedience, and changing subjectivities is a critical thread in Manganyi's oeuvre. The second point I'd like to return to is what I've referred to as Manganyi and the art of traditional scholarship, the art of interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, diverse bodies of work that are not only in psychology. At the risk of presenting an oversimplified characterization of his work, it can nevertheless be said that Manganyi's work has traversed several genres. He's focused on clinical work, psychological understandings of embodiment. This has, of course, evolved into his work on alienation in a racist world. The existential crises of being black in the world also opened up the terrain of life story genres in his writings. Autobiographies, biographies, memoirs. These were all partly a result of his experience, but also partly a result of his disciplinary influences at the time. Being Black in the World is an important text, and in my view, one of the critical texts for a number of reasons. It reflects Chabani Manganyi's growing confidence in his own disciplinary knowledge and his professional expertise at the time. It gestures towards a deliberate shift in his application of psychology to the social world. And it reveals a coherence in his thinking about the relationship between black subjects and their existential experiences in the world itself. The text is written in the 1970s, and it captures the zeitgeist, the moment, amongst many black South Africans, Africans, and those in the African diaspora. Intellectually, it is also one of the earliest South African psychological texts that explicitly engages with debates around psychology's relevance. By this, I mean that the text embraces the psychological dimensions of being a raced subject in the social world. It is preoccupied, too, with what we currently refer to as debates and studies of the psychosocial. And psychologists in the room will, of course, know that there are many debates about the psychosocial, studies that focus on the mutually reinforcing relationship between the individual and society. Furthermore, it is truly concerned with understanding the psyche-soma, the mind-body problem, and the way that the mind and body intersect when race persists as a social fracture or a social cleavage. Of course, Manganyi's written about this clinically in a number of spaces. um, thinking about how embodied subjectivity emerges in the face of infrahumanization and of psychic sequestration of black subjects. Finally, it is an explicit example of earlier intellectual work that spoke to the importance of undoing hierarchies in knowledge, power, and being through addressing the legacies of coloniality. And because of this, Being Black in the World remains one of these seminal texts that at the time of its publication revealed Manganyi's intellectual trajectory of the time, but also gestured towards his future work. The third and final point that I'd like to speak to perhaps today is just thinking about Manganyi today. In some ways, Manganyi's thoughts are thoughts for our time. Yeah, and so I want to kind of turn to this idea of reading Manganyi after the fact, reading Manganyi today. The historical context of a text production is critical to note because it shapes the nature and content of the text itself. It's important to remember that the text that I'm speaking about now, Being Black in the World, was produced in the decade following heightened forms of resistance to apartheid, as well as increased modes of repression. The book was published during what is sometimes referred to as the Durban moment. The Durban moment in South Africa was a time in which black consciousness was hegemonic as a political strand, and organized labor was gaining a great deal of ground through trade union organization. Central to this moment were the Durban strikes of 1973, during which black labor and broader anti-apartheid organizations operated together to protest the economic and socio-political plight of South African black working class people in particular. I want to just reflect on this, because in my conversations with Chabani, when we were talking about republishing this particular work, he said to me that he felt that Biko's influence on the political movement was monumental, and Being Black in the World was a response to that pulse in some ways. Manganyi also indicated that any scholar of that time, any black intellectual of that time, would, of course, have been aware of Biko, despite him acknowledging that he had not directly engaged with Biko himself. In addition, it's apparent from the text and other reflections from Manganyi that he had been influenced by writers of the time, Senghor, Césaire, by the existentialism in philosophy and the social sciences that's already been spoken about, which of course could be described as the precursors of what we today think about as affect theory or embodiment theory in the 20th and the 21st centuries. Now, despite all of that, Manganyi actually raised various critical questions about the republication of this work at the time. He was quite cautious. From the outset, he interrogated the language of the text. He went back to the text, and he was asking whether it could be understood today, or whether it was not perhaps a time capsule of sorts that was only applicable to that moment, the 1970s moment. More importantly, what this really raises is the question of how well theory can travel. And in this instance, my own view about Manganyi's work is, of course, that theory travels really well. His theory travels really, really well in this instance. He was concerned that the text's robust manner and tenor may be interpreted as overly combative in its register today, because he believed that it reflected the 1970s moment. He was also uncertain about whether the interpretations offered in the text would still be relevant today, and the extent to which the text would be a coherent reflection on the contemporary context. Now, as I come to the end, maybe just to say that Edward Said, in his dialogue with Jacqueline Rose and Christopher Bolas, makes the point that when you write something, it can actually be animated by inflections, by events that the author is not necessarily aware of. So when you write something and it goes into the public domain, somebody else can interpret it differently. This later history opens up and reopens challenges. It challenges the idea of what seems to have been the finality of an earlier thought. And so in some ways, it brings a work into contact with cultural, political, and epistemic formations undreamt of by the author. And this, in some ways, is Manganyi's legacy. It allows an entirely new generation of readers to reflexively interpret this history, the context, subjecthood, analytic logics, and the intent embedded in the original text. Under these circumstances, Manganyi's body of work has a legitimate place in the present as a lens through which to interpret contemporary South Africa. It's also particularly pertinent at a time of what I think is a deep crisis in the dominant liberal political project of the world, when the left is trying to recalibrate itself, but you also see a resurgence in right-wing conservatism and populism, anti-immigrant sentiments, xenophobia, crude nationalisms, narrow ethnicisms, and intense forms of racialization have reared its head once more. Not only in the US, you see this across the world today. Yeah? This is in Bolsonaro's Brazil. This is in Europe. This is in the migrant crisis of the Middle East and Africa into Europe. You see this in South Africa. We've had a long, long history of xenophobia in this country that ranges back to the 1980s already. Everybody thinks about the 2000s, but actually we've seen different moments of flashpoint since the 1980s already. Manganyi's life contributions will no doubt find fertile ground for reinterpretation under these national, African, and global conditions, and I suspect will also be read with a fresh perspective by many who have already encountered his work. Let me end off by saying that when I asked him how he thought the text would be received by those who read it today, Chabani simply stated that he hoped that it would be seen as an assertion and affirmation of the rights of all human beings. And I have no doubt that it will become apparent to many as to why his work should be considered a national treasure. It will no doubt find its position within the histories of South African knowledge production processes, where Manganyi himself will also take his rightful place as a scholar, a theorist, an engaged citizen, and a son of Africa, the world, and South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you to the program director, Ndianubuli Sanonke, to the family of Professor Manganyi. Thank you for gracing us with the warmth of Prof. Manganyi. We believe that he is amongst us. To Professor Zetungose, my dean, the Deputy Dean, Professor Mashawa, the boss of my boss, the school director of social sciences. We call her Prof. Azwi. To the COD of psychology, Professor Selinda. And to all my colleagues and my comrades in decoloniality, I greet you today warmly. Professor Makhubela asked us, or he rather challenged us to answer. I am a respondent, so, to respond to the question whether or not Professor Chabani Manganyi was not psychology enough. His work was not psychology enough. I would like to say, Professor Makhubela, that psychology is not African enough to grasp the works of Professor Manganyi. Because this psychology, which is Western psychology, it's regional psychology, indigenous to Europe and America, not really America, but Europe. It labels as sickness that which to us is life. Steve Biko says, school makes us live for home, thinking of ourselves in shame and disdain. That's what school does in general, and that's what psychology does in particular, as Professor Nhlanhla Mkhize had said. So I went all the way across the oceans. I haven't forgotten about you, Professor Mkhize. And thank you so much for being here, for giving us this lecture. And indeed, there could never been a better keynote speaker than you, Prof. Mkhize. You have walked right in the footprints of Professor Manganyi. And just like him, you demonstrated what it truly means to think of and perceive reality from where you are. Thank you, Prof. It is a full circle moment for me because Professor Stevens was my lecturer at undergraduate. Our first year. And you can imagine Prof. Stevens' class was in the afternoon. It was personality. Usually in the afternoon, students are relaxed and are not, yes, be embarrassed, Prof. They not really feel like going back to class, especially at UWC where campus is a distance from the lecture halls. But we would really run to Professor Stevens' psychology class because he is amongst the very first lecturers that planted the seed of critical thinking to us. Him and Professor Sipho Maseko in political science were really people who impacted us to think differently, to think as ourselves. He would bring us all these sitcoms that we enjoyed as children, like The Cosby Show, and make us analyze what they truly stand for, saying that they present a reality of a successful Black families. Is it the reality you know in your communities? And we started from there thinking critically about even the very textbooks that we had. He would make us analyze the pictures that we saw that were reflective of life, of a happy life in America. So this is where I come from. Professor Manganyi entered scholarship exactly at the moment of the rise of Black consciousness. He paints a picture in his work which Professor Mkhize has highlighted quite a lot in his keynote, a picture of a rejuvenated Black South African youth who were chanting Black love and Black pride. To Professor Manganyi, Black love and Black pride meant something deep. This I learned at his memorial service on the 6th of November, 2024. I remember Usis Palisa Kyobeka giving us an image of Prof. Manganyi that was very soft, that was very humane, that was very kind, but at the same time, an image of an uncompromising professional. Sis Palisa said, Professor Manganyi did not suffer fools gladly. Upon encountering incompetence, he would ask, how did the person get this job? Black love and Black pride to Professor Manganyi meant a commitment to excellence, not the type of Black excellence we speak of today, which has nothing to do with the true meaning of excellence. A commitment comes from the years of giving yourself to scholarship. Once you commit to excellence, you put in years of work. In our context, it is scholarship, our work. Years of learning, of thinking, of feeling, of doing the actual dirty work, and of rising. Prof. Manganyi was a consummate scholar first, before he became a diligent manager in higher education. He achieved all of that because he took himself seriously. Professor Ramose teaches us that we have to take the business of taking ourselves seriously, very seriously. Professor Manganyi's work challenges us to think about how a liberated people behave in society. What do they call themselves? What names do they use to define who they are? How do they define their psychology? What language do they use? Professor Manganyi's writing emerged at a time of brutal colonial apartheid's illegitimate laws. He looked through the window and saw how Black youth responded to political violence. His trailblazing ideas of Black psychology were informed by what he termed the vibrant youth who came to the fore to ignite an admirable kind of positive energy amongst Black people. Professor Chabani Manganyi heeded Biko's invitation to an epistemic exercise. Biko implores us to use our very own eyes to gaze at self, because the eyes that are in the books, in the psychology books that are not African, they are telling a different story about ourselves. They are not a reflection of ourselves as we know ourselves. Because that assertion that I write what I like is an expression of both epistemic obedience and epistemic freedom. To appear boldly and truthfully as a scholar. Epistemic disobedience, which is a concept we borrow from Walter Mignolo when we say we should reflect all epistemic notions that do not reflect who we truly are, and start chanting a body of work, just like Professor Manganyi did, that is a bold reflection of who we are. An example of epistemic freedom, where you are free to write truly what you like. To reject the colonial insults disguised as knowledge. This is what we are called to do when we think really freely, epistemologically, as Professor Mkhize highlighted in his talk. And also to embrace our own self-definition, because in all knowledge, when we look at knowledge, people who do the defining, they put a very positive picture of themselves and a very negative picture to allow their laws to subjudicate us. We have to appear negatively, because when we no longer believe in ourselves, we are easy to oppress. So it is Professor Manganyi in the 70s already started doing this kind of work to allow us to, even though he was pointing at everything that was wrong with the society at the time and continues to be wrong with the society today, he still showed us how to be Black in the world, how to create a different society, a society that reflects that it has Black psychologists in offices that are thinking in a free world, in a liberated way. In Manganyi, we witnessed this bold appearance in scholarship, an insistence on producing psychology that will be healing to a people, a psychology yokuphilisa uluntu. Our country should reflect that we have izifundo that are designed to heal a people. Our presence in these spaces is not just decoration. It should reflect how we know healing. It should be of healing. Our encounters with our students should be healing encounters. Our training to students, as Prof. Kgorong just said, it should be a training that allows them to heal the society. At the end of the day, we should look at our society and say, indeed, we do have an education in this country. Presently, it's painting an opposite picture. Maybe because what another comrade here at UNISA once said, that as Black people, we truly do not know, which is something very sad. I hope it doesn't reflect our stance today, that once we're given power, we don't know how to use it in our benefit. Everyone who has held a position of power, they know how to benefit their people, but ourselves. So Professor Manganyi understood the epistemic assignment which is entrusted upon each and every academic. While he revered Black youth of the 1970s, he also admired the elders. We see this in his less reference work, but very impactful, which is titled Looking Through the Keyhole. He begins the book with an interview with Professor Eskiam Pahlel. This conversation highlights an overarching thread of the work of a Black scholar, that you have to claim your own liberation. Professor Mphahlele in this interview speaks of feeling unseen by white people in a suburb where his mother worked as a domestic worker. This, he says, did not bother him at all, because he also did not see them. Which I found to be very profound, that we keep looking to people who do not see us. We want them to see us anyway. But Professor Mphahlele tells us that is a futile exercise. And that is the thing about liberation. You must use your own eyes to gaze at self. You must see yourself first. You will never want anyone to see you, or never worry whether or not they are seeing you. To Professor Manganyi, I hope we do not cause you to look away when we stand up and speak in the name of Black or African psychology. I hope we do not cause you to ask how we got to these platforms. I hope we remember to take the business of taking ourselves seriously, very seriously. I hope we remember the true meaning of Black excellence, not as a pop culture slogan, but as a call to give ourselves to the work, to scholarship, and to the true liberation of people. I hope you are sitting at the table of Amaqhawe Esizwe Esimnyama with pride that all you came to be was achieved. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Perhaps we need to give our speakers another round of applause, and this time a thunderous one. A thunderous one. Thank you very much. Thank you. We are doing very well for time. I'm surprised. Whenever you put psychologists in one room, they talk, they can talk. So we are now actually going to the Q&As. So I'm going to ask Mr. Pilani to make the mics available, if we do have, to then be able to assist with the communication. I'm going to open the floor. We'll just take questions in rounds so that we don't overwhelm our speakers, and that they can properly metabolize and respond to the questions and make justice of that. Do we have any questions? Questions, comments? They want us, I think it's Professor Stevens who said, this is a conversation that should be complementary of the speakers. I imagine he's not afraid anyway of a challenge. Thank you. So any comments, any questions? Yes, my good doctor?
Yes, sir. I think thank you to the speakers for an insightful tribute to Professor Manganyi. My question, I think, to the panel is, what are their thoughts on, because this is sort of my thought as well, that contemporary psychology in the post-apartheid era has often tried to move away from the question of race, has tried to avoid race as a question that is fundamental. I mean, if you look at, you could say the annual Psychology Congress, for instance, you'll often find race and conversations around racism are given euphemisms. They call it something different, and it hides in conversations around poverty, maybe gendered conversations, class, etc., etc.
To make them palatable.
To make them palatable, correct. And from my understanding and my learnings today, that Professor Manganyi's thesis and main central argument is that his argument is that whether I'm educated, whether I'm in these sophisticated rooms with white people, and whether I sort of carry a whiteness because I'm educated and I'm a clinical psychologist, the black body still follows me around. I still carry this black body. So his work, for me, really reminds us or invites us to really understand the issue of race and how central it is to say, I cannot run away from this black body because it has a particular political meaning in spaces and in my everydayness, in the everydayness of being black in the world. So that's the question I have for the panel, to say, what are their thoughts and why has the discipline of psychology, as I look at it from the South African context, moved and it continues to move away from the question of race as though this was a question of the colonial era of yesterday?
Thank you. We'll take another round of questions. Okay, we'll start here. Noted, my good sir. Thank you.
Thank you. I think in addition to that, I would like to pose this question particularly to Prof. Mkhize, because when you reflected on the clinical work that your students were doing, often they were assigned to, black students would be assigned to black patients. and white students would be assigned to white patients. So my question to the panel, and in particular to you, Prof. Mkhize, because you alluded to this fact, what are your thoughts with regard to the notion that psychology by its very nature is culturally linked, that would assist us in understanding whether we should pursue the debate of transformation, or whether it should be left as is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. There was a question also there.
Thank you very much. I just need to say thank you very much for the lecture given, and both for the replies that came from Prof. Stevens as well as Prof. Zetu. I just need to say what a dynamite. I mean, Prof. Manganyi being a person in psychology and being able to analyze and write in the arts fraternity, looking at Feni Dumile and Gerard Scotto, that means bringing their psychological therapeutic images into life. I just need to say he was an interdisciplinarian, of course, transdisciplinarian, of course. But now for Prof. Stevens, how can the society of today be able or be conscientized on how to understand transdisciplinary? Because one can be able to serve in the psychology side and be able to analyze an artwork, thus giving it a therapeutic perspective to the society here present. I am one of the artists, of course, but I do struggle to share to the world that I am not limited to the art discipline, but I can transfer to other side. How can we conscientize the society to be able to be absorbent? I do understand that Prof. Manganyi, by then, his knowledge surpasses many brains, because the world was not, African side, of course, not ready to absorb it. Maybe we are facing that the same way today. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take another round after the responses. The panel, I think it's a mixed bag, comments, but also some questions. Some questions go directly to specific speakers, but I think we can also help each other to answer some of the questions, because I think some of them are quite loaded and may require some assistance. Over to you, the panel. Where do we start? Okay. Prof. Mkhize is still formulating his responses.
Thank you very much, Program Director, and thank you very much for the very exciting questions. I think they do contribute to the conversation. In terms of psychology, moving away from race or racial matters, or seeming to move away from race, I think we need to look very carefully again at this notion of who defines psychology and at what point in time. Because if the people are defining psychology and articulating psychology from a particular vantage position, think that race is no longer a matter of concern, that is what is going to happen. Secondly, I think the issue of race now has become quite a very complex one, extremely complex, and I don't think we have today interrogated it from the various intersectionalities that are embedded in the notion of race. I want to be very paradoxical and say that I could have a black skin but be a white person. So those are the kinds of discussions that we need to think about, the various intersectionalities that we need to be interrogating in thinking about race in South Africa. There is also, of course, this whole discourse whereby there's a lot of concentration now on understanding power and the coloniality of power in the decolonial term. I think that movement is growing. Here at the University of South Africa, I do know that we have got the decoloniality summer school. We have participated together with you at the University of KwaZulu-Natal. I think those are some of the discourses that we need to encourage, so that people need to understand the complexities of race, whiteness, blackness, etc. Then the second question that I want to look at is this whole issue of assigning students along superficial racial lines. My thinking is that if a student is coming to undertake professional training, they are coming to undertake professional training. And they are not going to learn unless we assign them in a way that they are going to learn. Imagine a black kid presenting at primary school in an English or Afrikaans medium school without any exposure whatsoever to English or Afrikaans. Imagine that at the age of 4 or 5 or 6, and yet we are saying a 20-year-old cannot be put in a space where they will be forced to recognize their deficiency and learn another language. To me, this is the biggest mistake that we are making in South Africa, especially in professional psychological training. A lot of people have written about this since the 1980s, and yet the progress in this space has been very slow. Lastly, there was another question aimed at me. Psychology is linked to all psychologies are cultural. All psychology is cultural psychology, even empirical psychology, even Western psychology. But the problem is that Western psychology or Eurocentric psychology masquerades as a universal psychology to the detriment of other psychologies. And that is what we are critiquing in the colonial term. Thank you.
Thank you. Prof. Stevens, there was a specific, and I thought that Prof. Kakata will then add to the both of you. There was a specific question, I think, for you.
I mean, it was the question about interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity, if I remember correctly. How does one take one's discipline beyond one's discipline? I mean, it seems like a fairly simple question, but actually it's an elegantly complex question that you've posed. And to try to simplify that, I'm going to make a contentious, I'm going to offer a contentious response. I actually think that the modern university is not designed for that kind of interdisciplinarity or transdisciplinarity. The modern university speaks about interdisciplinarity and transdisciplinarity. You'll often hear us talk about this. All of us who are at universities, we talk about crossing boundaries, about not working in silos, etc. But the modern university fundamentally is structured around particular knowledge silos. Yeah? And actually, those knowledge silos gain their prominence and their epistemic power from remaining knowledge silos that are not necessarily porous, but are fairly closed off. In other words, the level of openness within universities to actually ensuring that transdisciplinarity or cross-disciplinarity or multidisciplinarity actually occurs. There's a lot of talk about it, but actually the structure of universities, I think, would need to change fundamentally to encourage that. The second response to that is that if you look at the people who really conduct transdisciplinary work, you'll see that they do that outside of the university. The interesting thing is that those people who do the most interesting work across boundaries are actually outside of the university. Or there are people inside universities who are able to find themselves outside of the university. And so there is something about the structural dimension of the work that we do and the places that we are located that I think fundamentally needs to change in order to promote the idea of greater interdisciplinarity or cross-disciplinarity or multidisciplinarity. Can I take a stab at the other question also about race? Yeah, I mean, knowledge doesn't sit separately from social context. Knowledge is always immersed and embedded in social context, and there's a reciprocal relationship between context and knowledge, right? And so in some ways, knowledge tracks social context, and social context tracks knowledge. And so if you think about the kind of location of race inside psychological theory in this country, you'll see that there was a whole set of things around the kind of 1970s and the 1980s. There was work on race attitudes and so forth. It was clearly tracking what was going on in the moment of the 1970s. It was very clear by the 1980s, if you think about the Kgorong of Bulls, by the 1980s, white South African apartheid architects knew that the writing was on the wall. The end of apartheid as they knew it was imminent. Yeah? And so there was a lot of work on race at that time and starting to anticipate this. If you think about the post-1994 period, the discourse in the post-1994 period has been the discourse of the Rainbow Nation. It has been the discourse of the cultural melting pot, the carnivalesque idea of we are all one, etc. That kind of discourse in our society has also started to shape the particular way in which race sometimes gets undercut from really important discussions, not only in psychology, but across the board itself, right? And so I think that there is something about the deliberacy. What makes Manganyi's work so important is that he actually operates with a deliberacy, an agency, and goes against the current that is very, very strong in the 1970s already. And actually he's taking a completely different, he's doing a 180, yeah? A completely different turn in the face of what is considered to be the dominant discourse. And I think that's incumbent upon us as people working in the area of knowledge production and knowledge distribution as well.
Thank you. I don't even know which question I should attend to, but to add to what Prof. Stevens has said about these centralized spaces where knowledge is supposedly discussed, I think we should be careful in borrowing our presence, lending our presence to spaces that do not serve us. Like there are so many spaces outside what used to be the center, which thinks of itself as a center, yet it's no longer the center. So there's a lot of spaces outside of it that are discussing what truly matters to us. So I think our duty is to align ourselves with that and actually work into ensuring that we are building on the works of people like Prof. Manganyi, who did the work, being deliberate with what we want to achieve. I think that also goes to the question about arts and how we can ensure that we are transdisciplinary about things like arts and artistic works. Just do, I would say that just do. I write a lot in poetry and before I say things I don't do. Yeah, and on music, from a psychological perspective, I never saw anything like that. Like there isn't a journal that can publish that work, but it shouldn't stop you from doing that kind of work. They will find you on the way. Maybe 3 years or 5 years to come, a journal like that shall emerge. It will find you on the way. Just do what your spirit tells you to do right now. And whatever space that might emerge in the future will find you doing the work. It shouldn't stop you. And you will find your people along the way. You will go to different disciplines, find your people in music, find your people in psychology, in visual arts. You will find that's how these spaces are created, and you don't know what will mushroom from that at the end.
Thank you. We're going to take a round of questions. Someone said, my good sir, someone said that, and I think the audience, the speakers will agree, that Prof. Manganyi had a disciplined indisciplinarity. He was disciplined in his indisciplinarity, right? There's a question that we're going to take. We'll start with you, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I must say that it is almost rare at this juncture to come to a place where we are being invited to elevate our thinking, calibrate even further the questions that we ask. I want to also lend my voice to paying tribute to this giant that we are about, in whose name we can go back and say, in our languages, we say Masikhulumeni. Because in many instances, these gatherings do not mute us in so many ways. So I want to pay tribute to that. It has been said that the university is a very vital part, the fulcrum around which the coloniality of power revolves. And as such, if we are then to deepen our questions, then we will perhaps say that the disciplines which make up the university are similarly bound and similarly geared. And in this day and age, at this juncture, we are trying to work within the prescripts and the confines of the corporate university. And to that extent, then the question arises, what then are the limits of the corporate university vis-a-vis this disciplinarity that Prof. Manganyi is showing us? That's one question. And another question that is related, this question of methodology that I think Prof. Mkhize spoke about, which in many instances does not allow us to break out and break through. And I would ask, what then is the response of psychology, even every other discipline, because the limitations that attain in psychology attain elsewhere as well. So this question of methodology that continues to hem us back in to seeing ourselves through eyes that we cannot own. And my final assertion that I put to the panel is that training is necessarily assimilation. And how do we imagine ourselves outside of those bounds? Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have other questions? Or are they enough for the round that we, okay. In the absence of other questions, I think we'll give the speakers an opportunity to engage and respond to the questions. So there's a mix of comments and also questions.
We can say thank you for the comment. So about on methodology, this question seems to come up more, especially from people who should be answering it, from professors who should be telling us really. I think we have a lot of examples, a lot of work that has emerged with new methods. Professor Oyewemu is one of them, where actually methods emerge from the field, where the community will tell you how to, because a method is to organize your work, make things make sense. Every culture has a way of doing things. So it has a particular method of doing things. We're just saying that the Western methods are actually insulting to the community because we come with, we pretend to be bringing questions, yet we are telling people how to be. So how can we reverse that? Is by listening to how the community says. I keep on making this example. I think Prof. Tlhabangani, you know, when I was doing my research with the elders, where they actually tell you, where you'd be trying to explain your ethics as you are taught by Prof. Stevens and Prof. Mkhize, you'll be trying, this study was ethically approved and this, and then the community would stop you and say, no, it will have to first be approved by us do we want to lend our voices to you to take to the university? So I'm saying those things you take from the community, you bring them here, you tell Prof. Ngozi, here is a new method that I would like us to try out in undergrad to teach our students how to listen to the people, listen to what they are telling us about how we should conduct our research. So there are many other creative ways, and they usually appear they call it the field, but it's not the field, it's our homes, in our communities. So we should take whatever it is that we hear the people are telling us about the very method. They're questioning how you address them, the language you no longer speak properly. All of those are critical into allowing us, you and I, construct a curricula now. So we should bring those things. No one will, Prof. Ngozi will not beat us when we're saying, no, this is how the people want their children to be taught. So each and every, whenever this question arises, I always take it back as a, what do you bring from your own research that we can co-construct as a new method? And I think that nobody told Professor Manganyi to talk about how to be black in the world, and nobody would have allowed him had he asked for permission. So you just do. From Professor Manganyi, we learned that you just bring yourself. Thank you.
Thank you.
I mean, again, thank you for the comments. And thanks for saving us, Program Director, because if we were to respond to all the comments, I think we'd be here for a long time, so thank you. Maybe just to say two things. The first is that method is method, right? The way that we get taught method in our disciplines, certainly in the arts, the humanities, and the social sciences, is predominantly through, and in psychology in particular, is either through the lenses of positivism, neo-positivism, quantitative research, and qualitative research. That's what we get taught. The fact of the matter is that what Zetu said actually is what we really should be thinking about. So it's important to have those foundations. Yes, it's important to know what we're talking about when we talk about method. But actually what that translates into in a particular context could be something completely different. If I think about 20 years ago, the idea, and something that's quite dominant in psychology today, the idea of photo voice never existed 20 years ago. Photo voice as a method simply didn't exist. And for those who are not sure what photo voice is basically where you give people disposable cameras and they go out and you ask them particular questions about how they see the world, and they normally take photographs of this world, and you start to see the world through their eyes, literally. Yeah? And this method didn't exist 20 years ago. Now this is not rocket science. Actually, technology has allowed us to do things in a very different way. You actually can see how it is, how the world is seen from somebody else's perspective. So the issue about method is, I don't think that method is right or wrong. The question is, what is the correct or the appropriate, not correct, but the appropriate method to utilize when we ask particular kinds of questions about people's life experiences? And if that method relies on somebody's life experience in context and the way that they convey that to us in a particular style, form, modality, then that is the method that one at least tests or considers. Yeah? So that's just in relation to the question of method. I mean, the comment about the boundaries of disciplines and universities, I mean, again, I think that that's accurate. You know, I think about somebody not only like Chabani Manganyi, I think about somebody like Mzilikazi Khumalo, who was a composer, who was somebody who worked in phonology, somebody who worked in African languages, and by virtue of the fact that he transgressed boundaries of literature, music, composition, etc., made him a kind of transdisciplinary scholar. But again, it was something that required deliberacy and agency. And then the last point maybe is just about training and assimilation. You know, I don't think you're going to get a lot of resistance on that point. The dominance of psychological training, especially professional training, is still geared towards European, Western models of training. It's particularly the particular conceptions of the individual psyche that we still continue to use. And again, the point about that Manganyi brings to the table, I think, for us, is that that nature of knowledge is not static. It is not fixed. It can be contested. And we need to be thinking about ways of thinking about a clinical training that is much more vibrant, much more open, much more accessible, and certainly much more relatable to the kind of context that we work in.
Thank you, Prof.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm going to be very brief because the questions have been addressed in an exhausting manner. There are a number of innovative methodologies that have come forward, especially in the past 2 decades. There are some very critical texts, for example, critical indigenous methodologies by Smith and their colleagues. Those are excellent texts, in fact, which are still, in fact, not prescribed in the curriculum of our students. If we were to ask our university how many of them deliberately include those texts in the training of students, those texts are still in the margins, but the methodologies are there, methodologies of storytelling, methodologies of community conversations. All of them, in fact, have been documented in a very comprehensive manner. It is now a matter of finding somebody who has got the willingness to engage the syllabus and include those methodologies. And we need to go beyond psychology because most of the innovations, in fact, are not coming from our discipline. They are coming from the critical literary arts, etc. So that in itself is telling us that in those spaces, in literature, there's psychological knowledge that we need to harness. In the song and songs, there's psychological knowledge that we need to harness. So we need to be conversant with those kinds of methodologies. The issue of assimilation is an important one. Again, it is linked to this question of who is considered to be an intellectual within the university is the one who has gone through the typical curriculum that all of us have gone here, who is thought to be the possessor of genuine knowledge. Now, from a decolonial perspective, we argue that no one has got a monopoly of knowledge. We have been trained in a particular kind of knowledge and paradigm. And there are many people out there who are at the level of professor, wise sages, who can come into the curriculum and do a much better job of training our students. But similarly, as my colleagues were saying here, we need to now interrogate the university and think about it as not existing beyond the boundaries of these walls. Because the university centers of excellence are distributed within all of the societies in which we live in. There are centers of excellence there. So in order to prevent assimilation, we need to be taking our students out of the university and training them in those centers, immersing them in those centers where they will be instructed by the sages, the holders of those particular knowledge traditions. And again, this requires being brave. Somebody has got to do it. Manganyi talks about it in his book, that we need to move beyond the office in the way that we are training our students. That observation was valid then, it is still valid now. Thank you.
Thank you. I hope I don't have myself a shy and a polite audience. I'm not seeing hands up. I'm going to give an opportunity, ma'am, to go again. In the meantime, I'm hoping that colleagues will find a way to find questions. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, I think we can only agree to that. This whole question of the meaning of the university on the African continent, I think we need to have a conference on that alone. There has been a lot of discussions about the role of the university on the African continent. And that question has not, in my view, been problematized enough. Because right now, there are a lot of discourses about what does it mean to be in a university, to what extent are we preparing students for the marketplace, to what extent are we ensuring that we are creating critically engaged citizens. Those are all debates that, in my view, that need to come back to the table and be interrogated at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay. Do we have more questions? Yes, my good sir.
Thank you. I'd like to first thank the podium. I think today is a blessing. Three of some of my favorite scholars within the South African thinking traditions discussing my absolute favorite scholar within South Africa's thinking tradition. So
you don't know what to do with yourself?
I don't know what to do with my. There's a Stoic saying that says some of the greatest blessing is to experience and enjoy the works of true geniuses, and that is what we enjoy in Manganyi's work, a true genius who thought of things beyond what they presented themselves to be at the time, and that is what we enjoy today, true geniuses discussing that topic, that man. So my question, and perhaps even a comment in it, is there was a lot of discussion on the ways in which we move forward Manganyi's work in the psychologies. I will be honest and tell you guys that Manganyi is the cornerstone of my thinking. I began my thinking tradition around Fanon, and I discovered blackness as a psychological concept. And I said, but I need somebody who's going to show me how does this structure manifest itself within the South African context. And Manganyi became that cornerstone for me in all of my work. In my recent, my PhD thesis, I used Manganyi to assess the financial behavior of black professionals. Those things do not necessarily match because Manganyi nowhere does he speak about the financial behavior of black professionals. But I use his work by saying, when Manganyi says black people are alienated from themselves, I say, how do they spend money on themselves? They're alienated from objects, how do they consume these objects? Alienated from the community, then how do they spend in the community? And alienated from time. Those are my main things. Alienated from time is one of the biggest ones for me, because I believe that it's one of the ones that is the question that we are asking today on how have we moved in terms of Manganyi when he was writing this in the original time and the time we are finding ourselves today. I want to give you guys a small example before I finish off. Most of us might not think we're alienated from time, but concepts like black text show us that alienation. So I don't know how many people know that black text is not something that black people invented. It was actually a text by the apartheid government that taxed black men more than any other race in South Africa if they earned 180 pounds, which is about 26,000 rands to 28,000 rands. And in fact, if you did not pay that tax, you were arrested. About 200,000 men were arrested on that tax. It was repealed in 1990. It was in place from 1925 until 1990. I say this to sort of show that Manganyi's work is transcendental. It's not something that's going to stay in place. It's not something that should be analyzed within just the bounds of psychology. It's something that should go out of the bounds of psychology. And perhaps this is where my question comes in for the speakers there, is that how then do we see a way in which we can invest in the knowledge that Manganyi produced, not just in psychology, because I really don't think he needs to be bound to psychology. Because there are a lot of the things that he spoke about that are manifesting today. And then my question is that, how do we move it forward, given that as young scholars, we still feel unsafe when we engage in thoughts and scholarship of scholars such as Manganyi? I think I gave more of a comment than a question.
Yeah.
But if anybody could help in terms of understanding that, because that's one thing I do.
Yeah. Do we have another question, comment? I think, yeah, as we're getting colleagues to get more questions, a similar sort of situation. I think it's two-pronged. Is a comment about the generative nature of Prof. Manganyi's work, and that it has legs, and therefore that we should necessarily not limit it to, and be selfish enough to limit it to psychology. And I think most of our adjacent disciplines have already taken that cue. In fact, they find more use for him than we have done. But there's also then a question linked to that I hope that colleagues can help the colleague with.
Thank you. I think, Prof, you've just answered that question.
I've answered? Oh.
And I think also Prof. Mkhize has also given us possibilities on what could be done, such as committing himself to a Professor Manganyi lecture at UKZN, jointly with UNISA. Prof. Nkosi said that. And I think there are so many things we could do with Professor Manganyi's work, and also which I could say he does say something in the very first chapter of Being Black in the White World. He does speak about our relationship with materiality, and where is my student? My student just graduated. I wanted her to show you how she has read Prof. Manganyi. Yeah, because she speaks about that. Because the Western definition of life is materiality. Once we question that, it will collapse all questions we have about how we relate to materiality. Because our orientation to life is actually through humaneness. Professor Ramos always uses the proverb. I'm not sure if I'm going to say it correctly, but it says, thank you very much. That one, yeah, because we relate more spiritually, humanely than materially. And the Western orientation is materially. Capitalism is the core of their understanding of life. That is why when you have less, you do not have voice. When you have less materiality, you have acquired less, you do not have voice, you do not have prestige. And to us, prestige is earned through being umuntu in the society, through living through the prescripts of Ubuntu. So we must just, Professor Zondi always says, we must look at the fundamental question. What is the fundamental issue here? It's how they are orientated to life, which is in contrast with how we are orientated to life. So we need to shift our relationship with materiality, knowing that it's not ours, it's never ours. Hence, the more you climb the ladder, the more you have still to achieve. You never really say, I now ndingumntu, I've done it all, I have enough money. There's always something you don't have, because that's how their world is constructed. And by doing this kind of work, Black psychology, African psychology, all of this type of work that allows us to bring ourselves to scholarship, we're trying to shift our orientation to focus at the core of our being, which is humanness. Thank you.
Colleagues, want to add?
For me to say anything beyond that would
Well,
just detract from that answer right now.
Prof. Kize?
No, thank you. There was a question about psychology, and the fundamental question we haven't really interrogated is the naming of the discipline. Maybe this is what I want to leave us all with. Is this the correct naming of the discipline? If we are looking at it from the perspective of a particular epistemology, but also the work of Manganyi itself. So those are some of the things that we need to be looking at, especially on the continent. Because if I were to challenge any one of us here to come up with the word psychology in your own indigenous languages, most likely we are going to fail that particular test. If you go to our own communities and we try and explain what we are doing using this nomenclature, it's difficult for us to explain what we do. So that disjuncture, that tension is still there. And for me, this is where some of the future work is to be located. Thank you.
Can I do something, Prof? I think you raised something, I imagine, very important. But I wonder, do you have any ideas, I mean, on this idea of naming, whether we it doesn't matter how unmetabolized and unprocessed these ideas are, but what would be your thoughts about where to start? It's a big question. It requires a community to respond to. But I'm just taking opportunity that you raise it, and I imagine you can't raise it if you don't have thoughts about where we should start in answering that question.
I shouldn't have raised this. Well, there have been a lot of suggestions in the literature, and there is no single opinion, because that in itself would be against the spirit of dialogue. There are people who are raising the issue of Ubuntu as the basis of this kind of psychology we are talking about. Some of you who may have read the work of Ramose is spending a lot of time and effort talking about the Moya psychology, the psychology of spiritness. There's a lot that is emerging in within the discipline, but those are all located in the future. Thank you.
Thanks. A last round of questions. So I'm going to say this to the COD and also the executive dean, that if we hear people complaining and say we didn't give them an opportunity, they'll be lying about us. And we shouldn't then have colleagues also talking on the side while they have the opportunity to actually engage with our speaker. Thanks. So I'm going to close the Q&A and be thankful for the fact that we've been good with time. I'm going to move to request and call to the podium the COD of the Department of Psychology, Professor Selinda, who's going to do two things. She's going to give us remarks on the day, but also then she'll be doing some gifting for the family. Prof, can we welcome you to the floor?
Yes, sorry, I had good morning on my notes. Good afternoon, everyone. Before I start, I just want to take a moment to thank you from the bottom of my heart for being here. Whether it's in this venue or joining us virtually, your presence means more than you know. So my day started on a different note. It somehow reminded me that, the personal and professional are really intertwined. In the early hours of this morning, my daughter woke up vomiting. And in that moment, I had just to pause and remember what matters most. It was out of deep respect for this event and for all of you that I made sure that she was well and in safe hands before I came here. So this was to make sure that I'm fully present, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally with all of you today. I stand here filled with both sadness and joy. This project honoring Prof. Manganyi, it began in 2020. At the time, our intention was to celebrate him while he was with us. However, life had other plans. But I've come to realize that this moment, right now, is exactly how and when it was meant to be. Had it happened then, I don't think that, it would have unfolded with the depth, maturity, and alignment we see today. So many people involved in this project are directly or spiritually connected to Prof. Manganyi's legacy, and for that, I'm deeply grateful. To Prof. Takata, thank you for believing in this vision. Thank you for linking our department with Prof. Manganyi's family and for walking beside us as we bring this vision to life. Your willingness to support future projects rooted in his work means so much to us. To Prof. Mkhize, thank you for your generosity, your humility, and your time. We are honored to have you deliver this inaugural lecture and bless this occasion with your wisdom. To Prof. Stevens, thank you for agreeing to be a respondent and for already committing yourself to future Prof. Chabani Manganyi's initiatives. Your continued involvement adds depth and continuity to his work. To Prof. Malusi Makubela, thank you for directing the program so beautifully. Your calm presence kept us grounded and flowing. To the Department of Psychology team, what can I say? There were nights when we worked until late, sending each other voice notes, editing slides, revising lists, or simply encouraging each other. And this is because we wanted this lecture to succeed. Not just as an event, but as a gesture of honoring a giant. And you carried that spirit with dedication and grace. Thank you. To everyone joining us in person and online, thank you for trusting us. Thank you for showing up. It gives me comfort knowing that Prof. Manganyi's legacy lives on, not just in books and titles, but in people who gather to remember, to reflect, and to build. To the Manganyi family, thank you for your kindness, for granting us permission to use his name for projects still to come. In the Department of Psychology and the College of Human Sciences, we do not take that permission lightly. It is a responsibility we carry with reverence. Colleagues, this is just the beginning. More initiatives in honor of Prof. Chabani Manganyi's legacy are still to come. We are committed to ensuring that these projects are not only sustained, but also integrated meaningfully into our academic programs. Ultimately, our goal is for students to learn about Prof. Manganyi with the same depth and reverence as they do about Freud, Skinner, and others. We are finalizing a special issue with the Journal of Psychology in Africa to further reflect on Prof. Manganyi's contribution to psychology, thought, and society. We will be in touch with you as soon as the administration of the special issue has been finalized. We are also waiting for feedback from the South African Journal of Psychology and the South African Journal of Higher Education for additional collaborative projects. And now, it gives me great pleasure to offer this gift, a portrait of Prof. Chabani Manganyi, to his beloved family. May this be a reminder of the indelible mark he has left on all of us and the generations to come. Thank you.
I don't think there's ever an image of Prof. Manganyi that beats that one. I'm sure the family will fight with me. It's a personal favorite. Thanks for the remarks, Prof. Selinda. Well, really getting to the end of our program, I'm going to similarly request Prof. Mabandu Madzusi to also come to the podium and give us a vote of thanks and closing. She's not only, please, Prof, you may come. She's not only responsible for that, but she's also responsible for assisting us with giving a token of appreciation to our speakers from the department and also from the college. And I'll get this close to you just now.
Hakenza swinene. Hita singular havo manani or manana. They say Shangani Shlung. So Shangan is English. So I can Englishize Shangan. It will still be okay. So Hakenza swinene that you are here with us. The family. It's really, really a great honor to us as a university to have you and also to allow us to remind you and to put into remembrance your beloved one. Because when we are remembering him like this, somebody said, it's like you are making a person a member again. So we're making him a member again of the family and also a member again for academia. So we're so I don't have words to tell you how grateful we are as a family. To the organizing committee, I know when you see the event like this, there's a lot which have been happening. The fight, the struggle, and everything. And somehow we were even fighting with us when we were refusing some money, say, oh, this is too much. But all in all, here we are. We are so grateful and we see what you have done. I won't mention the name of the team which was under organizing this, but here we are so grateful. To the executive management of the college under the leadership of Professor Z.Z. Nkosi, the boss of me. Again, I was told I'm the boss of the boss. So that's my boss. So we're so grateful for your leadership and your understanding. And also seeing the vision and wanting to support it. So without you, I don't think the department will have reached here. So we are really, really, really grateful for that. And for everybody who have attended, it wouldn't have been like this without you being here. whether it's online, whether it's physically. We really, really appreciate you. I'm so grateful. You know, it's so good to have a younger sister. She made a vote of thanks for almost everybody. So I'll just highlight some of the things which I've mentioned, like to the keynote speaker, Prof. Mkhize, when he was saying whatever he was saying about Prof. Manganyi, I realized that, yes, that was a giant. So we are so grateful for you portraying him the way he was and spiritually the way he is still. So I'm so grateful. And when you were talking about Black students being allocated to Black patients, I really said, I agree, because I also want to be treated by a decolonized therapist who understands where I come from. When I'm hearing the voices of the ancestor, the person will understand this is ancestral call, not telling me that this is a post-traumatic stress disorder. So I will like that decolonization to happen when somebody is a trans. I don't need the therapist who will refer a person to say, you know what, you need a wig, you need a lipstick, you need this and this, and you need a boyfriend. Your solution will be solved. We need really decolonized therapists who understand a human being in totality. So we are grateful for that, but we're still saying, let us not look at the color. If it's a white decolonized therapist, we can go to that. If it's a Black colonized therapist, we won't go to that therapist. So let's be the real psychologist who need to be the real psychologist. Prof. Stevens, for me, when you were talking about Prof. Manganyi, I just thought of a saying in Chivenda, which say, "Muri ubonala wowa." Like we see the tree, the true height, the true breadth, the true width, the true everything of a tree when the tree has already fallen. Because really the way you were portraying Prof. Manganyi, we realized that he was not a small boy. So thank you for bringing that picture of all who he was. And I think even what you have said might be a portion. There's still a lot which can be analyzed from those fallen branches, fallen leaves, and fallen everything. And we can come up with million publications from him only. So when you are, Prof. Cylinder is talking about special issues 3, 4, we might need all the journals to give us special issue. And we won't finish Prof. Manganyi. So we are so grateful for that picture you gave us, because we can just say him as a psychologist, him as a therapist, him as an academic, him as an author, him as everything. So we can have a special issue. Him as a VP, principal, everything. So as a director, as a board member, wait, let me just stop here. We're so grateful. Then to Prof. Zethu, I like the way you were framing him. How you were talking about his excellence, his devotion, his commitment. I'm so grateful. And also grateful for you telling us about who assisted in making you the you we know. Thanks, Prof. Stevens. You have made a dynamite there. Yo, hey, so we didn't understand where you were coming from, but now at least we know the tree which you have hanged on is a real tree. So thank you for that. I would also like to thank the program director, but he have been thanked before. So see, I think in I had Allah. So nitaminyika the gift. Shangana islungu. So it's so good because Shangan is English. You can say whatever you want.
Spectacles. And also your,
My notes.
yes, your notes.
Don't worry. It's the concept papers. You can start writing at.
I feel like I didn't do a good job. I think we should have asked Prof to direct the program. COD, I think the next one, I think we should, she's a pro. I think we should, she drafts me. We should actually, thanks, Prof, for the vote of thanks and closing. Colleagues, certainly we've come to the end of the program today. The COD has explained that this is an evolving and a breathing project, and this is just part one of the aspect of the project. I'm going to make a few announcements. I think I was informed that the department has organized. Yes. Okay. The department has organized some refreshments for keeping us this long, and to make up for exactly that, we will try to perhaps start with the family, and then we'll go to our speakers, and then we can then also have the management following the family with the speakers, and everyone then can then help themselves. Before we do that, so that we can enjoy our meals well, the dean has asked actually that we try to get a group photo. I imagine it will be in different segments, the speakers, the family, and the management of the university, but we'll coordinate it as we go. Perhaps let's maybe just get on to that, that we have photos. I think there may also be colleagues in the, who would want to take photos later. They will then arrange for that later. But officially, maybe let's give this opportunity because we still have time. I think we still have a few minutes. Thank you. Colleagues, thank you.